And our next interpreter.
Xin chào đón tất cả quý vị đã tới tham dự cuộc họp ngày hôm nay. Ngày hôm nay chúng tôi sẽ có thông dịch viên cho cái cuộc họp này. Nếu mà quý vị nào tham dự cuộc họp này có thể chọn cái ngôn ngữ mà mình mong muốn, ngay quả địa cầu quý vị có thể chọn ngôn ngữ Vietnamese để được nghe tiếng thông dịch bằng tiếng Việt Nam. Cảm ơn quý vị rất là nhiều.
Now, for those of you that are participating by Zoom and you would like to this evening submit a question via your computer audio, you can press the icon join via audio here. And for those of you that potentially are struggling with your internet connection or you're participating by phone, you can dial in to 669-900-9128, and then you enter the webinar ID and then press pound. Once you're ready to ask your question, you can raise your hand and we will enable your mic and you can unmute yourself. For those of you participating by phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. And then when you're called upon, you press *6 and you can unmute yourself. So, housekeeping issues, meeting logistics. As you know, tonight's meeting is being recorded. The meeting is planned to run from 6 to 8 if our questions are exhausted. If not, the meeting may run just a little bit longer. We'll be rotating questions between our variety of audiences, live and virtual. For those that are participating live in the boardroom tonight, we're inviting folks to complete a comment card. And again, for those of you participating by phone or via Zoom, you're welcome to submit your questions by raising your hand or submitting them in your Q&A portal. This meeting is being telecast on Facebook, and you're welcome to review the frequently asked questions and answers that are available on the project website, along with all the other history related to the project. And that's available at www.valleywater.org/Coyote-Creek. And we thank you in advance for just joining us in any of the technical glitches, but we're really hopeful that the meeting will progress smoothly. Again, we'll be rotating questions between our variety of audiences in the boardroom, Zoom, Facebook, and those submitting questions via Zoom. This is tonight's agenda. Oops, sorry. We'll have a welcome from the Board of Directors, and then you'll hear from 2 staff members that'll provide an update on the project. After that, we'll open the floor to the public for questions. And just to preview, if you have legal questions, we recommend that you refer those to your legal representatives. Also to forecast, and we'll review this at the end of the meeting, tonight's meeting is a project update, but in sometime this fall or winter, Valley Water plans to host some community meetings to update neighbors on the design of the preferred alternatives. And with that, I'd like to introduce Chair Tony Estremera, representing District 6. He's been on the Valley Water Board since 1996. He's retired, a former directing attorney with the Legal Aid Society of Santa Clara County. Chair Estremera.
Thank you, Christine. Good evening, everyone. My name, as Christine mentioned, is Tony Estremera, and I have the privilege of not only serving as the board chair this year, but also representing District 6, which includes a lot of areas there along Coyote Creek. Welcome to everyone that's joining us on Zoom, Facebook, and also in person, as this is our first hybrid public meeting. We had great success with people joining us online over the past year, and we plan to continue to offer multiple ways for you to engage with us in the future. Also, welcome to the elected representatives joining us tonight, and to the City of San Jose staff who are listening in to today's meeting. And let me quickly introduce, Christine will introduce a couple of my colleagues, but also wanted to mention that Director Linda Lazard is also joining us virtually. And just quickly to let you know that Carrie Duncan from Zoe Lofgren's, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren's office is also with us out there. And Nick Casper from the office of Maya Esparza, council person that also represents some areas there in Coyote Creek. And with us, of course, is Diana Torres from our own Senator Dave Cortese. The last time that we met virtually, we were in the middle of the pandemic. And since our last meeting, our staff has been working to move these two flood protection projects forward. Tonight, we're going to update you on the project, its progress, and what we can expect this fall when we host meetings specific to the 3 communities where the work will occur. Many of us also follow the progress of the Anderson Dam seismic retrofit project and Anderson Dam tunnel project. In fact, on July 7th, we held a groundbreaking event for the Anderson Dam tunnel project. You can view a recording of that event by visiting valleywater.org webpage. The tunnel project involves constructing a 1,700-foot long tunnel up to 24 feet in diameter, which will house the 8-foot outlet pipe and protect it from damage. The new tunnel would allow Valley Water to increase the amount of water released by a factor of 5 during an emergency. We expect to have that work done and completed by the end of 2023. Now, completing the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project and Coyote Creek Flood Management Measures Project are critical to the Anderson Dam project. Tonight, we'll hear more about these projects and their progress. We're expecting many questions following the presentation with our staff ready to address your questions. Christine, back to you.
Thank you, Chair Estremera. Now I'd like to introduce Director Barbara Keegan. She represents District 2, a successful civil engineer serving executive management roles with the City of San Jose and Valley Water, and she's joining us today virtually.
Thank you very much, Christine, for the introduction. I'm Barbara Keegan, as was mentioned, and I represent District 2, and that includes the section of the project from Highway 280 downstream to where Coyote Creek goes under Highway 101 near Watson Park. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight, whether it's virtually or in person. We really appreciate your participation. Valley Water has been busy working on the preferred alternatives for the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project and Coyote Creek Flood Management Measures Project. These projects are an extremely high priority for the Valley Water Board and represent our commitment to supporting public health and public safety in our communities. Our objective is to reduce the risk of flooding to homes, schools, businesses, and highways in the Coyote Creek floodplain up to the level that occurred on February 21st, 2017, which was approximately a 20-year flood event. My board colleagues and I continue to vigorously advocate with our state and federal representatives to secure funding for these critical projects, which are really essential to achieving flood protection for our communities and for those of you who are participating tonight. Tonight, we want to hear your thoughts and questions on these two vital projects. As Christine mentioned, I'm a civil engineer by trade. I've delivered a lot of public works projects. And one thing that I've gained through my experiences, no expert knows a community better than the people who live in that community. So we really need your input to ensure that these projects can be as successful as they possibly can be. Tonight, we have staff from various divisions of Valley Water available to respond during the question and answer portion of tonight's virtual meeting. Thank you again so much for your support, patience, and collaboration on these projects. I personally appreciate it, and I know the rest of the board does as well. Christine, back to you.
Thank you so much, Director Keegan. Next, I'd like to introduce Director Richard Santos, representing District 3 since 2000, a native of Alviso and a retired San Jose fire captain.
Thank you, Christine. I am Richard Santos, your director of the Santa Clara Valley Water District, and good evening to everybody. This is a priority project that we're all working on together. I represent basically all of District 3, which is north from Montague Expressway down to Monterey Road. It has been said that all droughts with a flood, and that's what happened in 2017. So we can't talk about flood protection without mentioning the extreme drought emergency as we're currently experiencing. Folks, as a former fire captain and a person who's lost everything he owns 3 times the floods, I'm very sensitive, been through it, it's devastating. All I know is this: we've had 12 consecutive meetings. We're listening to everybody to help design this project. We're working with the Army Corps of Engineers, City of San Jose. We're working with everybody, trying to get folks out there so we can go in and clean up the creeks and do even more work. I can say it's a collaborative effort. We want to thank the voters for passing the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project, receiving safe, clean water and natural flood protection program, which voters overwhelmingly approved in 212 and 220. Collaboratively, we're going to work with everybody, businesses, residents. We're eager to hear what you got to say and implement those things. So with that, be safe. And we appreciate you attending tonight. And Christine, back to you.
Thank you, Director Santos. So before we jump into the details of the update, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Rochelle Blank. She's the Deputy Operating Officer for Watersheds Design and Construction Division with Valley Water. Rochelle?
Yes, thank you, Christine. Welcome, everyone, and I want to thank you for joining us at tonight's progress update meeting for the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project and the Coyote Creek Flood Management Measures Project. You know, when we last met, we were wrapping up the planning phase and received your input on the preferred project alternatives for each of the creek sections presented at the 3 virtual neighborhood meetings. Soon after those meetings, the preferred alternatives were approved by our board of directors for the staff to pursue and evaluate. Tonight, we're going to update you on what we've done, what we are doing, and what we will do to move this preferred alternatives into design and ultimately construction. You know, we continue to seek your input and comment as we move the projects forward. So please ask your questions, and we prefer if you could hold your questions till after the presentation. Thank you very much for joining us again, and back to you, Christine.
Thank you, Rochelle. Now, into the presentation, I'd like to introduce the 2 key staff people at Valley Water involved in the flood protection project and will be providing the informational update this evening. First, Alec Nicholas, he's a capital project manager with Valley Water, and he's accompanied by Julianne O'Brien, the project manager. I want to remind all of the viewers and participants of tonight's meeting that you're welcome to view again the history of the project information, as well as the current frequently asked questions and answers list related to the project at www.valleywater.org/Coyote-Creek. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Alec Nicholas. Alec?
Good evening, everyone. Allow me to pull up my PowerPoint presentation. All right. As Chrissy mentioned, my name is Alec Nicholas. I am the Capital Engineering Manager. Oh, closer? Perfect. Thank you. Bear with us as we get used to the hybrid setup here. Let me start over again. Again, my name is Alec Nicholas. I am the Capital Engineering Manager overseeing both the Coyote Creek Flood Management Measures and the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project. And this evening, we will be giving a project update on both of these projects. So a quick agenda for this evening. We will recap what we have discussed previously at past meetings, provide an update since our last public meeting in June of 2020, provide a quick project overview of both projects, introduce the project team, and then I will be handing it over to Julianne O'Brien to discuss the current and upcoming project activities. So just a quick recap of the project timeline. In February of 2017, a storm event of 5 to 10 years combined with flows from Anderson Dam caused flooding in Coyote Creek and the surrounding communities. That was approximately about a 20-year storm event. Right afterwards, the Valley Water Board of Directors directed staff to begin the planning phase for the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project to provide protection to these downstream communities from a similarly sized storm event. That planning phase lasted for several years and culminated in June of 2020. In February of 2020, we received an order from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that directed Valley Water to begin the construction of the Anderson Dam Tunnel project to ensure Anderson Dam is drained and remains drained. That order and the resulting FOCP, or FERC Order Compliance Project, resulted in 40% of the original Coyote Creek flood protection project having to be accelerated both in the design phase and in the construction phase so that they can be designed, constructed, and in place by December of 2023, which coincides with the completion of the Anderson Dam Tunnel project and the release of potentially additional flows downstream. So we want to make sure that the downstream communities are protected from flows from Anderson Dam Tunnel project. Concurrently, we'll also be working on the remaining 60% of the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project that we see here in purple, and that will be constructed and in place by the fall of 2025, which also coincides with another Anderson Dam milestone, the construction of the higher level tunnel and the beginning phases of the Anderson Dam seismic retrofit project. And we are currently right here in the design phase of both projects. Sorry, my screen is playing tricks with me. So in the planning phase, we had several steps. The original was the conceptual alternatives analysis. We solicited public input and we revised those to the feasible alternatives, which we presented to the public and solicited public input as well. And we further revised those into the preferred project, which we presented in 3 different public meetings in June of 2020, last year. Afterwards, on June 23rd, 2020, the Valley Water Board approved the engineer's report, and we have since begun the design phase of both projects. And today we'll be soliciting input on the current project updates and providing additional updates as we move forward. So a quick recap, the Valley Water Board approved the engineer's report in June of 2020. Since then, we have also hired an environmental consultant, GEI. We have also hired a design consultant for both projects, AECOM, and I'll be introducing the project manager later on in this presentation. We have continued to work with multi-agency staff regarding other projects affecting the creek. One notable agency is the City of San Jose and coordinating with their Coyote Creek Trail project. We have begun the preliminary design activities. These include obtaining permissions to enter from the affected property owners that have flood protection elements adjacent to or potentially on their properties only to begin data gathering activities in those locations. So a quick overview of the project limits. The downstream limit is Montague Expressway, as we see on the top of the screen, and the upstream limit is Tully Road. We have split the overall Coyote Creek project into 5 different reaches. Reaches 4 and 8 are noted in purple. All the elements in both these reaches fall under the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project with a completion date of fall 2025. Reach 5 elements are all in the Coyote Creek Flood Management Measures project, which has a completion deadline of December 2023. And lastly, reaches 6 and 7 have a mix of elements in both projects. So now we'll be delving into each reach a little bit to discuss some of the specific details. Reach 4. In Reach 4, we'll be using 2 flood elements. One, a flood wall that we have in orange on both banks. And across the roadway surface of Charcot Avenue, we'll be using a passive barrier. Now, what is a passive barrier? A passive barrier is we have outlined in yellow over here, and we have a picture on the right-hand side. These normally lay flat and will lay flat across the roadway for cars to use the bridge. But during a flood event, as the waters overtop the bridge barriers, these will flip up under normal buoyancy forces and will prevent the water from going up and down Charcot Avenue. The passive barriers will also be connected to the flood walls, both upstream and downstream of the bridge, to provide continuous flood protection in this region. Here's a little cross section depicting what we would see if we were to look just upstream, or sorry, downstream at Charcot Avenue. So we have the bridge. We have depicted the flood wall on the left-hand side. This would obviously occur before and after the roadway, not across the roadway. And then across the roadway, we would have the passive barrier as we show in yellow on the right-hand side. Moving upstream to the next reach, reach 5, we have, again, a combination of flood protection elements. In orange, we have flood walls, both on the west bank and a smaller portion on the east bank, providing protection to the residential properties over here, as well as a new levee providing protection for the Golden Wheel Mobile Home Park area. Here's another little rendering of where the new levee would go. Mobile Home Park is on the left-hand side of the screen, and it'll be tied into the new flood wall going further upstream on the west bank along the UPRR tracks. A cross section in this location shows the levee on the left-hand side, the new levee, with the proposed water surface elevation and the short flood wall providing protection to the residences along Notting Hill Drive on the right-hand side. A little bit further upstream, still in reach 5, we have additional flood walls along the west bank of the creek. This is across the creek from the San Jose Flea Market and the BART station. And a proposed potential flood wall type is what we see on the bottom left corner. For the eagle-eyed viewer, this is something that many would recognize from Reach 8 near the Rock Springs neighborhood that Valley Water implemented after the 2017 flood event as an interim protection measure. Here's a cross-section of that San Jose Flea Market area. We would have the flood wall on the west bank providing protection to the commercial properties in that location. Now moving upstream to Reach 6. Over here, we also have a combination of flood protection elements. We would have flood walls in orange on both banks around the 101 area. We would have a passive barrier across the roadway that leads into Watson Park, as well as a vegetated berm along one side of Watson Park. Now over here, this cross section is taken right here, just downstream of Highway 101, between the San Jose Mayberry Service Yard and the commercial properties on the west bank. We would have a flood wall on the west side, as well as a flood wall on the right side between the future Coyote Creek Trail and the service yard. The next section cut that we see over here is in Watson Park. Now this specifically is taken right where we have this little yellow line is at the passive barrier. So driving into Watson Park during a flood event, you would see the vegetated berm on the right-hand side, providing protection, the passive barrier across the roadway surface, Jackson Street specifically, entering the park, and then a flood wall running along Jackson and turning behind the residences on the left-hand side. Okay, I just turn on my laser pointer. Hopefully this is a little bit clearer for everyone. In Reach 7, we have a lot more of combination of flood protection elements. Again, as many of you should be familiar by now, flood walls in orange on both banks. We will have a vegetated berm along William Street Park. This will also incorporate aesthetic features on the park side, such as a terrace seating area potentially, which I'll show a little image of a little bit later on. In yellow, we have passive barriers, one along the Coyote Creek classroom, but also a long passive barrier element along the eastern edge of Selma Olinder Park. And last but not least, we have these areas shaded in purple. These denote low-lying homes relative to the water surface elevation of a 20-year storm event. Now, during the planning phase, after soliciting extensive public input and considering the various different alternatives, the two preferred alternatives that were identified for these low-lying homes were to either elevate the property or acquire the property and restore that property to a riparian habitat. Now, This is going to be on a case-by-case basis with each property owner soliciting their preferred preference, as well as with a feasibility analysis during the design phase, once we have gathered the site-specific data for each property to be able to better determine the best solution. Now, here's a little rendering of the low-lying home. In purple, we show it here that the bottom level, for example, the habitable space would be flooded. This is just a rendering of raising the habitable space above the water surface elevation. Along Watson Park on the west side, we would have the vegetated berm. We show this purple, potentially terrace structure as well to provide some seating area for the public. On the east bank, or on the east side of Selma Olinder Park, we have that passive barrier. This was specifically chosen to prevent any loss of visibility into the park from pedestrians, bicyclists, and also the residences that live right across the street from Selma Olinder Park. And last but not least, we have Reach 8. Reach 8 has 3 flood walls as well as a vegetated berm near the Rock Springs neighborhood. The first location right here, this little orange near Happy Hollow Park and the 12th Street apartment buildings, will be a shorter flood wall on the west bank, providing protection. Moving further upstream near Rock Springs, we will have a flood wall tied into a vegetated berm, and that'll be across the creek from the Cooksey family stables. And this is some pictures of the interim measures that were constructed after the 2017 flood event in this Rock Springs neighborhood. We have the flood wall here as well as the berm that was constructed afterwards. These would be replaced by a new berm and a new flood wall. And last but not least, we have a shorter flood wall also near Tully Road to provide protection to that intersection, as well as the San Jose Water Company groundwater station. So now to move on to introducing the project team. Again, my name is Alex Nicholas. I'm the Capital Engineering Manager at Valley Water, overseeing this project. I am joined here by Jose Villarreal. He is the Public Information Representative at Valley Water for this specific project. His contact information is shown here for any questions. Jose, if you wouldn't mind turning on your camera and microphone and introducing yourself to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hello, everyone.
Okay. Jose will wave, but his contact information is shown on the screen. I'm also joined here by Stephen Huang virtually. He is the project manager from our design consultant, AECOM. Stephen, if you wouldn't mind turning on your camera and your microphone and introducing yourself to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Stephen Huang. I'm the project manager of the AECOM team. We have been selected to provide the plans and specifications for those various elements that Alec has gone over with you on the various reaches. And we will also providing the engineering estimates to go along with the plans and specs so that we can take that package to bid package. And at the same time, we'll work closely with the environmental consultants to make sure that all the elements meet the environmental permitting criteria.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Stephen. And last but not least, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Julianne O'Brien. She is the project manager for both of these projects. Again, her contact information is also shown not only on this slide, but also these slides will be available on the project website, and both Jose's and Julianne's contact information is shown on the project website as well, if anyone has any questions after this presentation. And with that, I will stop my presentation, hand it over to Julianne.
There we go. Hello, everybody. As Alex said, I'm Julianne O'Brien. I am the project manager for both the Coyote Creek Flood Protection Project and the Management Measures Project. Today, continuing on with the planning phase slide that you saw from Alec, I'm going to continue describing the project design phase. So right now we're in the beginning of the 30% design, and then the next step will be 60%, followed by 90%, and followed by advertise for construction. As you can see by these arrows here, between each phase, we will have another set of public meetings and we'll solicit public input from you at that point in time. So current and future project activities. Right now, as I mentioned, we're in the preliminary design phase. So we're here, we're in this 30% phase. So we're gathering data. We're beginning to work on the design criteria, technical design memo. We're reviewing the existing right-of-way. And we're continuing our study into elevation or acquisition for those selected properties. This began in summer of 2020 and will continue throughout the fall of this year. And this is for both projects. Concurrently, we're also working on the real estate and utility coordination. So what does this mean? We're working with negotiations on with the property owners. This will be for both easements and for the properties that will be acquired. And we're also coordinating with multi-agency staff. This began primarily in the fall of last year for both projects, and for the management measures project will continue through spring of 2022. And for the flood protection project will continue through spring of 2023. Then the next steps will be environmental permitting, and that phase takes approximately 18 months. And then the rest of the design phase for both projects, which the 60 through 90% design. And this time period is going to take approximately 12 months. And then lastly, we'll advertise for construction. So for the management measures project, this will occur in the fall of 2022. And for the flood protection project, it is anticipated to occur in fall of 2023. As mentioned in one of the earlier slides, we will continue to meet with the public at the completion of the 30%, 60%, and 90% design phases. And we'll use that opportunity to update the public on the current project status, as well as solicit public input on various design elements, such as aesthetics, signage, open space elements, public art. And for the individual homes that were selected for either elevation or acquisition, we'll be having more frequently meetings with those particular owners to update them on their progress. So as I mentioned, we're in the data gathering phase. The owners that are on the call who were part of the management measures project, this is probably going to look familiar to you because we've already done that. For the owners who are on the flood protection project, this is kind of a heads up of what is coming. So the site reconnaissance, this is a 30-minute visual exterior inspection to include photo documentation. And it takes approximately 30 minutes. The hazardous substance liability assessment. This is an approximately 1 hour, again, visual exterior inspection to identify any potentially hazardous materials on site. This is to protect not only the public, but community, but the construction crews during the construction phase of the project. This allows us a chance to mitigate or manage those materials prior to construction. Topographic survey. So this is a 1 to 2 day assessment. It depends on the size of the property and the measures that are proposed for the property. So this consists of topographic and other survey measurements, including elevations of features. Then the biological assessment is again, a 30-minute visual exterior inspection to document any biological resources for the purposes of environmental impact. So this allows us to be aware of what's already on there so we can hopefully design around it or be aware of what mitigation efforts we will need to provide for any impacts. Similarly, the cultural and archaeological assessment and the historical and architectural assessments are 30-minute visual exterior inspection to document any of those resources, again, for environmental impact purposes. And lastly, for the properties that are identified as needing geotechnical borings, this will not be necessarily every site that has already been identified as being impacted. This, we will need to drill and do soil sampling at those locations to gather data on the soil conditions. And this can be a 1 to 2 day assessment, depending again on the size of the property, how many samples are being required at those locations. Here's a couple examples of some equipment that you might see for these assessments. Right here is an example of one of the geotechnical boring vehicles, as is this one over here in the lower right. Here is an example of some survey equipment that we will be using to do the the topographic survey, as well as here we have a surveyor in the creek collecting data. Updates on the home acquisitions and elevations. So we did recently purchase 4850, 60, and 70 South 17th Street in a voluntary sale from a willing seller. We are currently continuing to gather the data on the feasibility analysis of elevation for the remaining properties that have been selected for either the elevation or acquisition option. And we will continue to work with each homeowner individually on these. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Updates on the next public meeting. So this will occur at the completion of the 30% design. Once that is complete, we will have the next round of public meetings. They will likely take place later this fall, so fall of 2021. We will have 3 separate meetings, similar to how the meetings were last summer. So we will have 1 meeting per district. This will allow us an opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper on the specific elements impacting those areas. And then meeting details will be provided on the website once they are finalized. And you'll also be notified via flyer and Nextdoor and similar manners that you were notified about today's meeting. And once again, that website is www.valleywater.org/coyote/creek. And I will now turn it back over to Christine for questions.
Thank you. So it looks like we already have a question in the queue. Let's see here. So, and again, we will rotate questions, but before we get started, I just want to review briefly our ground rules. And we just ask that, you listen to the staff responses or the public questions with an open mind. Go ahead and submit your questions. Be curious, assume good intent, use respectful language, try to be brief and concise. So as many of the individuals that are participating tonight have an opportunity to pose a question. It looks like we've got 71 participants. And then again, if you have legal questions, please refer those to your respective legal counsel. Just a reminder, the meeting's being recorded, and you heard Alec mentioned that the meeting recording will be posted on the project website. You're welcome to go back and refer to the information or the Q&A session at a later date. We'll rotate questions. We contemplated providing comment cards. Our audience is not terribly full, but we certainly will make those available for individuals that are interested. And again, raise your hand or submit your question in the Q&A portal, and feel free to refer to the frequently asked questions while we're progressing this evening. through the public discussion period. So with that, I am going to start with the first question in the chat, and then I'm going to ask Valley Water staff to let us know if there are folks that would like to join the meeting and share their question verbally. The first question that we have is, please describe the height of the Coffer Dam upstream of the dam reconstruction site, and how much runoff from the watershed will be diverted into the bypass tunnel. And then there's a supplemental question, will the Coffer Dam have a soft plug like the one built for the Auburn Dam before the project was abandoned? And with that, I am going to ask Chris Hanks to respond to that question.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Chris Hakes, Deputy Operating Officer for Dam Safety and Capital Delivery. This question is directly tailored towards our Anderson Dam Seismic Retrofit project and specifically the second phase of the project. Currently, for the next 3 or 4 years or so, we'll still be in the first phase where we're constructing the Anderson Dam Tunnel project. The Coffer Dam actually won't be constructed till phase 2 when we're done with the Anderson Dam Tunnel and begin the Anderson Dam Seismic Retrofit project. Currently, the Coffer Dam is, the design is looking like it's about 40 feet high. It's still in design right now, so the specifics about whether there'll be a soft plug or not have not been nailed down. As the design progresses, that information will become available. The intent is to bypass all of the watershed flows through the, basically through and around Anderson Dam. That may be through the existing, or I guess newly constructed outlet tunnel, the existing outlet, or a piping system. That is still to be determined.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So I do see that we have 3 questions that have been submitted in the chat, and I just want to ask the Valley Water staff if those members of the public would like to pose those questions in person, or if you all would just prefer me to read those for the audience to hear. I'm going to go ahead and read them. The first question is, please provide details about the planned berm, and I think this is going to Alec, and project elements for the William Street Park. Alec Nicholas incorrectly stated that it was the Watson Park when he showed the slide. So maybe we can
Sure, let me
clarify that piece.
Let me just pull up my PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you.
There we go. Okay. So William Street Park. So over here, it will be along the western edge that we see in pink. This whole pink line will be a vegetated berm. And on the cross section, let me do it. There we go. So this will be the vegetated berm. On the backside, on the park side, there will be several different considerations as we meet with the public during the 30, 60, 90% phases. One of them, an idea, is to have a seating area or some sort of terrace area to sit and enjoy the park. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay.
I will stop sharing now.
Okay, great. I'm gonna jump to another question submitted that reads, when will you be coming to properties on Brookwood? And I understood there might be alternatives to raising or demolishing houses if they are on the list but didn't flood in 2017.
So I can answer the first half of the question. So we are still waiting on we have about a dozen PTEs, so permission to enter documents that we're still waiting on for the flood protection portion of the project. Once we have those, we'll begin reaching out to the owners to schedule the assessments. It will likely be actually in the next couple of weeks. I know the geotech borings are scheduled to begin later in August. So stay tuned. We will be reaching out shortly to begin that scheduling process. And then I'm not sure I understood the second question. Part of the question, could you repeat that, Christine?
There might be alternatives to raising or demolishing houses if they're on the list but didn't flood in 2017.
So I think if I'm understanding correctly, I believe there's one home on Brookwood that has potentially already been elevated. And when when our survey crew goes out and completes the topographic survey, if we're able to confirm that the home is above the water surface elevation, then we wouldn't need to do any work on that particular property.
Thank you, Julianne and Alec. I also want to read a question that was submitted by a meeting participant that one of Valley Water's staff responded to in the chat. Paul Madish asked, will the recording of this event be available on the Valley Water website? And Damaris, the former project manager of the early planning phases, indicated, yes, it will be posted in the project website. Alec mentioned it, Julianne mentioned it, and I did earlier in the session. But again, that website is www.valleywater.org/project-updates/20.
The easier one would just be valleywater.org/coyote-creek.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, let's go to our next question. Katya Irvin is asking, what kind of environmental review permitting will be conducted for these projects? Will any documents be available for public review? I think, Alec, that's your question.
Sure, I'll take that on and I'll probably pass this on to
Stephen?
Jennifer Mitchelson
Jennifer.
from Valley Water, our environmental planner,
Great.
excuse me. Regarding the second question, during the environmental phase, there will be several instances for public input and soliciting public input on the environmental impacts. And with that, I'd like to give it over to our environmental planner, Jennifer Mitchelson, to chime in a little bit further.
Hi, yes, the flood protection project will undergo a full CEQA review, and whether it will be a mitigated negative deck or an environmental impact report will be determined by the level of impact, whether or not that's going to be mitigated or able to be mitigated. And any CEQA review is always completely transparent and open for public review. We'll also be looking at which resource agencies have jurisdiction, where we'll have impacts on resource agencies that have jurisdictional oversight as well. So if we have any impacts on riparian vegetation or anything like that, then we'll be looking at getting like lake and stream bed alteration agreements with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and potentially the water board for a 401 cert and things like that.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Thank Alec. The next question comes from Tom Yeager. It reads, I'm a resident just north of 280, and it appears there are no plans for flood protection adjacent to my home, which was flooded in 2017. Can you add any context to why that is?
So there's probably a couple different elements to that. The elements that we are proposing in William Street Park will contain the water in the park during a flood event, which will protect a larger segment of the community. So even though you may have been flooded in 2017, these elements that are now being proposed around William Street Park will help protect you in the future. If you're concerned about your property specifically, shoot me an email with your address and I can check the modeling and see how that's going to impact it and confirm that you will be protected from the 20-year event.
Great. Thank you, Julianne. The next question comes from Stan and Kathy Rubin. In regards to the acquired property on South 17th Street, what will be the appearance of the property after homes are removed, and how will it be maintained?
So that is going to be finalized during the design phase, as well as the environmental permitting phase. If the properties are going to be acquired and then demolished, as mentioned earlier, they'll be restored to a riparian habitat corridor. Now, the specifics of that will be discussed with the regulatory agencies and will be presented to the public and the community to provide input on, as well as we proceed forward in the design and environmental permitting phases.
Great. Thanks, Alec. Before I proceed to read the next question in the chat, I'm going to ask Valley Water staff if there are any participants that have their hands raised and they'd like to ask their question live. Okay, it looks like we have two. Do you want to admit?
Hello, can you hear me?
Juliet?
Hi, yes, this is Juliana Pendleton. I'm the Environmental Advocacy Assistant with the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. I want to have a couple questions about native plants and trees, especially along the riparian corridor. Having this native vegetation is incredibly important along riparian corridors, and this was somewhat discussed just earlier, but I was wondering if you could provide more details about the types of and amount of native vegetation that you will be implementing in your flood control protection plans and designs. Thank you.
I'll take a stab at that, and then Jen, feel free to chime in. So the first element that I'd like to respond to is during the planning phase, the planning unit took as an extensive effort to locate these flood protection elements very strategically to be outside of the channel, to minimize impacts to the vegetation and the habitat inside the channel, number one. Number two, during the design phase and the environmental permitting phase, that is when we will know a little bit more on what we will be proposing, potentially, if there's any impacts and how to mitigate for them. And with that, I'd like to transfer it over to Jen to add on as she sees fit.
Yeah, I'd like to just add that one of the benefits of this project is that we're not doing any in-channel clearing of vegetation. So the design is so that the elevation of the storm flows at peak elevations can, that the stream can accommodate the flows with all of the native vegetation in the channel. So that's one of the priorities for the environmental impacts on this project, is that we're trying to reduce the environmental impacts by not clearing the channel in any way. So there will be some minor vegetation impacts along the very edge. Most of the walls are being located where there's existing fences or on the backside of industrial buildings and industrial areas. So there might be some trimming of riparian vegetation right along the edge, and most of that will be replanted or recover in some way. So so just to reiterate that there's going to be no major clearing of vegetation in the channel.
Great.
Oh, I would add one more thing, and that is that we are still evaluating how much riparian vegetation, where the flood walls on the outside edges, how much of that will be impacted. So we don't exactly know quantitatively what that looks like yet, but we are in the middle of evaluating that now.
Great. Thank you, Jen. We have another individual with a hand raised that would like to join the meeting, and it's Gloria Sierra. Gloria, can you join?
Yes. Hi. Thank you. I see that my one question said it was answered live. Was that just during the explanation of Reach 7? I did, or maybe I missed it. I was a few minutes late, but my other comment was, excuse me, about the South 17th Street homes that the district acquired. I just drove by there a couple of days ago, and there's a bunch of tents popping up along the street. And as you know, there's a ton of homeless encampments and makeshift structures that are behind the fire station, but there's a continuous problem with encampments on that portion of South 17th. So I hope there's going to be some measures or whatever you guys do to, control that situation so that we don't have the environmental degradation, the pollution, that kind of thing. Because it's really a concern over here. It's a constant daily battle for us that live here. So can you please tell us what your proactive measures are going to be to protect the creek? Thank you.
Yes, and that has come up in previous meetings.
Yeah.
Alec, do you want to start, and then
Sure.
we can have Jen also engage and respond?
Sure. For the recently acquired properties, one of them is actually still, they're rental properties, and there's still a renter in one of the properties. And two of the three, there's still renters. Oh, better? Still getting used to a microphone now in person. There's still two of the three structures are still habited. So that is one of the easiest solutions that we are employing to make sure that the homeless encampments do not become an issue for the neighborhood. Now, when those renters move out and before the structure is potentially demolished, we are looking at other alternatives to ensure that that property or those properties do not become homeless encampment areas. One of them is to re-rent it out on a short-term basis to ensure that there's always a habitant in that structure on that property.
And do you want just Jen to add anything, or that?
Yeah, Jen Codian could probably add some additional information for once it has been returned to the riparian corridor, what our measures will be.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, Jen Codian, Deputy for Watersheds O&M. I'm happy to answer that. And I think, Gloria, we've spoken in the past, and Irene, I also saw your comment. And I know that we've chatted in the past regarding this situation. Unfortunately, the actions that we've been able to take this year are very limited. And that's because the Centers for Disease Control is still recommending that if there's not an individual housing opportunity for the homeless, that they be left in place. And so the county as a whole and the city of San Jose are operating under those premises too. And until that guideline changes, we really are limited in the actions we can take. One of the reasons why we would be able to abate is for the construction of the project, because it's a public safety issue, constructing a flood control project. So during the length of the project and construction, any encampments within that path would have to be abated and kept abated. I heard you mention the fire station, which is City of San Jose property. And really, the property owners have the responsibility of the encampment areas. And so you would, have to discuss with City of San Jose how they're managing those specific encampments. I'd also like to just remind everyone that Valley Water only owns small properties within this project area. And so really our efforts on the encampments are impacted by the ownership of the properties too. So I hope that helps to answer it. And, like Alex said, keeping those rentals inhabited is definitely the best course of action moving forward. And once the CDC guidelines change, we'll reassess our priorities and probably move forward with developing a tier system for how we manage the encampments.
Thank you. So our next question in the Q&A portal, I believe that Jen had responded to it with the assessment of the potential alignment of the flood protection related to the existing habitat foliage. But the question it's from Michael: will the heritage trees be preserved at William Street Park?
Yeah, so I can take a look at that, respond to that one. The 30% phase is just starting right now. We're doing the data gathering. So once we know the specifics, the northings, eastings, for example, of where these trees are potentially located, and coordinating that with our proposed flood protection elements, we will as Jen Mitchelson mentioned, taking every effort to preserve everything that is out there. And we will keep that in mind, obviously, during the design phase. And we will do our utmost to preserve all the trees, especially the heritage trees.
Thank you. Our next question is from Irene. It reads, recently Valley Water explained they cleared 200 tons near Umberg over a couple of weeks in May-June timeframe. And sorry, I just lost my question. What is the current budget for the cleaning? What is the current budget for cleaning Coyote Creek end to end as water travels the entire length of the creek?
I think that's a good question for Jen.
Jen Codian, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So Irene, the cleanup you're referencing, we partnered with the city of San Jose. Actually, the city owns the lands there. And under our current MOU, we can operate together on each other's properties. And so we were able to assist them with that large cleanup. And in addition to the 200 tons that were removed, we removed over 40 cars from the creek channel, 300 tires. It was a huge effort. So to answer your question about the rest of Coyote Creek, as I explained before, really the ability to remove trash and debris is the responsibility of a property owner, and Valley Water doesn't have jurisdiction to operate on everyone's properties. So really our efforts to clean trash and debris are concentrated on the properties that we own, which are mostly downstream of Charcot to the bay. That being said, we do operate on a lot of the city of San Jose's properties like Umberger when we're operating together jointly under the MOU.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Katya Irving. Let's see. We're starting to come in relatively quickly here. What is the flood risk to the reaches in phase 2 of the flood protection project, which includes the Olinder neighborhood after phase 1 is completed? Julianne, is that?
Yeah, I can take a start to answer this one. So part of the planning phase of the project for the entire project was to make sure that any of the elements that we were proposing were not transferring the risk of flooding to other neighborhoods. So the risk of flooding to the reaches, for example, in phase 2, is going to remain the same as it is now until phase 2 is completed. We are not adding additional risk to those neighborhoods.
And to add on to that one as well, all the elements that are going to be constructed in the Coyote Creek flood management measures will not only provide protection against the flows from the Anderson Dam Tunnel project, but also will provide protection against a 20-year storm event as well, similar to the Coyote Creek flood protection project elements.
And so there's a question here about the repair and restoration of the Riparian corridor. What are the plans to repair and restore? We heard a little bit about this from previous response to a question. Repair and restoration of the Riparian corridor damage along Coyote Creek between Story Road and William Street caused by the homeless encampment.
I think as Jen Codian mentioned, we aren't the owners of most of the creek in this reach. So that will be a coordination effort with the city of San Jose and other stakeholders in the area.
Right, right.
Christine, this is Albert. Gloria had a question earlier that Damarie was asking a clarifying question. I'm gonna read it for you, and hopefully we'll have one of our staff answer. So earlier, Gloria asked, please explain what may happen to the creek area between East San Antonio, Arroyo Way to East San Carlos behind homes on the 200 and 300 block of South 17th Street.
So let me just pull up my screen really quickly.
It's under the Answer tab if you want to see the written version.
Right.
Thank you.
So that there will be no change to those homes.
I believe it's this area specifically. And then, as mentioned earlier, the purple highlights are for the low-lying homes, and the orange highlight is for the proposed flood wall.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Irene. Since berms can hide people and trash buildup, will Valley Water regularly maintain the condition of the berms? Is this type of cleanup in the budget?
So I'll respond to that one. So excellent question about security. Actually, one of the FAQs on our website, specifically FAQ number 16, deals with this specific question. We did take security into account, especially along that long vegetated berm along William Street Park. It will be of sufficient height such that SJPD patrols can be able to easily look over the berm to assess any security risks in the park. Regarding maintenance, that will be, since that is City of San Jose property and park, that'll be an ongoing agreement that Valley Water and City of San Jose will need to execute to determine operations and maintenance after the project is complete.
Thanks, Alec. Yeah, no worries, no worries. Jeffrey Hare asked the question, if a property is deemed to be unsafe for an owner-occupied structure, how is it deemed safe to be rented? And how does renting a structure prevent homeless camps?
So I'll take a crack at that one. The property is not structurally unsound. It is low-lying with respect to the water surface elevation from a 20-year storm event. So in the interim, before we begin the construction of the project, which would entail for this specific property, demolition and restoration of that property to a riparian habitat, in the interim phase, we will be pursuing potentially renting out that property to ensure that it is occupied, and that will be a natural deterrent for homeless encampments to come onto that property area.
Great, thanks. And then the next question we have is from Cynthia Jones, and she asked, can you discuss what proactive measures funding will be in place to continue the cleanup of the creek during and after the project? And so obviously there's a common theme with these questions.
Yeah, so similarly, to what Jen has mentioned earlier, the cleanup of the creek is going to be primarily dependent on the individual owners of the creek, and Valley Water does not own a good portion of this creek. We are able to go in and clean up the areas that we do own, and we are coordinating with the city and a couple private property owners to do some cleanup in order to construct this project.
Great. So the next question comes from Irene, and it reads, Measure S, permanent property tax, was approved to clean the creeks, not just segments of the creek. Water travels, so we need regular maintenance. Is Measure S funding shared with other owners, in quotes, of the creek?
I think that's a good question that I'd like Jen Kodian to chime in.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Safe Clean Water funding does fund a lot of the work that we do at Valley Water. However, we do have grant funding that helps other agencies and other nonprofits assist with, such things like invasive plant management or cleaning up the trash in the creek. To get back to, your statement that it was approved to clean the creeks, not just segments of the creek, really the reality is that we have a 10-year permits from 7 federal and state regulatory agencies. And those permits evaluate environmental impacts on Valley Water's jurisdictional property. And so really it's not about, us not wanting to clean those sections of the creek. Our routine maintenance permits don't allow us to operate on properties that didn't have the environmental impacts evaluated for. So that being said, we do partner with City of San Jose under the MOU to be able to assist them on their properties, but the private properties and other agency properties in between, our routine 10-year stream maintenance permits wouldn't allow us to do that type work. That's why we have the grant funding under Safe Clean Water, because we do want other property owners to be able to share in the Safe Clean Water funding. And it is available to submit for grants to get funding to do trash cleanups, invasive plant management, riparian planting projects. And so I hope that that answers your question, Irene.
Great, thank you. And we have another question from Jeffrey Hare. What are the plans to repair, restore the riparian corridor damaged along Coyote Creek between Story Road and William Street caused by the homeless encampments?
I think I'll just respond briefly to this one. As Jen Codian mentioned, Valley Water is not the majority property holder in the creek. And that is going to be a ongoing discussion and potentially coordination with the property owner, which I believe is the city of San Jose in that area. Like,
Correct.
Right.
There's a couple owners, but it's primarily city of San Jose in that area.
Great, thank you. So I just want to ask if we have any other individuals that have their hands raised that would like to join the meeting and verbally pose their question. And also, if other meeting participants, we've still got 58 people in the meeting. Feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A chat. So Katya Irvin is asking, will there be attempts to make all of the flood control elements aesthetically pleasing?
yes, and that is the main reason for soliciting public input during all the design phases, the 30, 60, 90%. We will be showing the public what we have proposed, and we'll be soliciting your input, one of them being aesthetics on all these elements.
Great, excellent. And then we also have a member of the community that's here with us in the boardroom that would like to pose his question live. Welcome. Thank you for being a part of this discussion.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Yeah, Michael Fitzgerald. So we live in Nagley Park near the corner of 12th and William, and we have rental property near the corner of South 20th and East San Fernando. And we watched the 20th Street, the February 17th flood, excuse me, very carefully. And we watched the water coming up. And I'm looking at the map here. It seems when you're traveling west on William Street, when you get to 16th, the elevation rises and they have those homes there they call the terrace. They seem, now the park flooded to about 3 feet, but they were, so I'm looking at this and I see the berm, but I'm curious because it seemed the water went out the east side of the park, and I'm just guessing on this because I'm not an expert, and it flooded Olinder, and then it seemed like it went down William Street, down 19th, went down 20th, almost got to our apartments on San Fernando. And during the day, I was going back and forth across the San Antonio Bridge before they closed it. And I went down 20th to my neighbor's property on 19th, and the water, it was a river. It was not a creek. It must have been 70 yards wide. And as you know, it flooded the homes on Arroyo. And when I left at 5 o'clock, it was up within about 2.5 feet of the back of those properties. I don't know how high it went. So I'm just curious, as I see the berm for 16th Street, and I know you've designed this, but I'm just thinking, well, gee, the terrace houses are already protected by their elevation, but it seems like the water escaped on the east side of the park and then flowed down. So I don't know if you can do anything about it, but I'm just curious how I imagine you can protect this Olinder school, but is there any way you can, I guess there's no way you can stop it from going down William Street, and it flows north. And what we discovered by watching the tagged houses is apparently as you go down, for example, 20th Street, it looks flat, but it apparently rises gently. By the time it got to San Antonio, luckily only a little bit went over it. So I'm just curious about the protection. This is a very general question, but the protection you have on the east side of the park. And I have one other question. As the evening went on, it appeared that the pressure of the water, I'm guessing, was pushing the water through the storm drains, and it came up near the storm drains on my corner. and pretty soon my sidewalk was flooded on 12th and William. And would this mitigation be able to stop something like that? So I guess I have two rather general questions, if you can bear with me.
Sure.
So I will answer your question about the storm drain outfalls. That is going to be the city of San Jose. The outfalls are not part of this project. That is something that the city of San Jose is aware of, and I believe they are working on. I know they are doing some outfall work, so you'll need to coordinate or check in with them on that. As for the other part of your question, I believe, if I'm understanding correctly, the east side of the park, meaning somewhat Olinder Park, is that where you're talking about?
Yes, the school is right there, just a few yards past the bridge.
Right,
and-
so we've got the passive barriers that are planned in that area. So they're going to be embedded in the sidewalk. So when you, on the day-to-day basis, you're not even going to notice them. The sidewalk is going to, it's going to be flat. It's going to look like normal. But then during a flood event, similar to what we showed in Charcot Avenue, the buoyancy of the water is going to cause those passive barriers to rise up and act like a flood wall along that portion of the park, containing the water inside the park.
Well, that's good. And that would just leave William Street itself as an exit point, because there's nothing you can do to the street, right? And-
I believe actually we have I think we might have a passive barrier there as well.
Along the Coyote Creek classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have like specific address that you'd like to share with us, we can provide you more detailed information for that specific location after, our project would be implemented. But regarding the storm drain outfall question as well, we are joined here by City of San Jose staff, Jennifer Seguin. I don't know, Albert, would you mind promoting her to chime in on potentially the storm drain question as well?
Thank you for your question.
Jennifer, are you with us?
Hi, this is Jennifer Sagan. So I'm actually involved on our operation and maintenance side, and the question probably needs to be answered by somebody who's on our capital project side. My team responds to minor flooding, and we maintain the outfalls, but we don't do any capital improvements. So I can take that question and just let me know who to get back to, and I can provide an answer for you.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'd like to ask the Valley Water team to bring Patrick Ferraro into the meeting. He has his hand raised and would like to pose a question to staff.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having this meeting and for proposing all of these various barriers to essentially channelize the flood flows and keep them off the floodplain and in the river. My question really is, are you in the process of restricting all this water from the floodplain and protecting all the development that's occurred on the floodplain or in the bypass channels, like in South 20th to 23rd Street, all that area that it was kind of a bypass to Coyote Creek. Anyway, as you construct all of these, I'm wondering, are you in violation of the FEMA regulations that require a zero rise in the floodway? It seems impossible for you to restrict all this water and keep it in this channel without violating that regulation.
Thank you for that question. We are joined here by Valley Water's HNS hydraulic staff. I'd like to invite Jack Shu to provide some input on that question. Sorry?
It'll just be a minute to bring him into the meeting. Thanks for your patience.
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, my name's Jack. I'm the hydrology team at Valley Water. Thanks for your question. Very, very keen. So the project, so the FEMA regulations, the The CFR, which you're referring to with the no rise in the floodway, is for the 100-year on the base flood elevation. So because we're only protecting the 20-year, anything above that will spill out anyway. So if you imagine the entire area as a big kind of pond, it'll just inundate regardless of if there's a levee or not. So it would not, it should not affect the base flood elevations subject to CFR.
Great. Thanks, Jack. We have another question in the chat from Anya. It says, hi, Ron Atkins, a founder of Friends of Coyote Creek, no longer active. I continue to boat on the Coyote Creek, and by observation, that includes me and perhaps one other person in a good year. The previous drought added a significant number of dead trees falling into and across the river creek. We might be entering a more severe drought. People are asking about creek cleanup. Perhaps they need to be made aware of the potential for even more trash obstructions due to the drought. Do you have advice? I'm thinking, Jen. Mhm.
I'm happy to answer that. So, first, if you see a tree down, I'd like to ask that you report it to our Access Valley Water online submittal system, because if it is on Valley Water jurisdictional areas, either property that we own or property we have easement on, we will send one of our watershed engineers out to take a look and make a determination if the tree would affect flow. That being said, I also want to let everyone know that Coyote Creek is a salmonid stream. And what that means is that large woody debris is actually habitat for the salmonids. And so we are restricted by what we can do with that large woody debris if it meets certain size criteria. So it is kind of a complex issue, and we would need to evaluate it. Beyond that, the trash obstruction, we do operate under another MOU with the city of San Jose to remove what we call trash rafts. And actually just last month, we did partner with them and remove 2 rafts on Coyote Creek. One was adjacent to Orvis, and another one was upstream of San Carlos. So that is something that we actively do. And again, if you could just submit it or tell your neighbors to submit it through our online submittal system, we'll see if it's something that we can address. And if so, get back to that requesting person.
Great, thank you. And Valley Water staff just shared that for community members to share creek concerns, you can always submit those to www.valleywater.org/access-valley-water. Thank you. So the next question is from Katya Irvin. Why is the berm on the west side of William Street Park needed, since properties to the west are not subject to flooding?
I think, just to clarify, I don't think we've mentioned that Coyote, the properties on the west side are not subject to flooding. That berm is to protect that whole neighborhood. The vegetated berm along William Street Park is to protect that whole neighborhood. As well as the flood wall at the bottom of William Street Park on the south end is to protect that whole area, with obviously the additions of the flood elements on the Olinder Park side, as well as along the across the street from William Street Park along the Coyote Creek classroom that we have a flood wall and a passive barrier.
Additionally, right now, water escapes the park via 16th Street and floods homes north of East William Street and on South 16th Street. So the berm will help protect those homes. So again, the entire neighborhood, not just the homes immediately across from the park.
Right, and just to share my screen really quickly, we're talking about this pink line, the vegetated berm along the west side, as well as this flood wall and the passive barrier and flood wall along the Coyote Creek classroom up here.
Great, thanks. Albert, I think we'll need to bring Valley Water's hydrologist back into the meeting for this next question. Michael is asking, is the hydrologist saying the creek within the channel will rise higher than in 2017 during a 20-year flood?
Hi, this is Jack again. No, so what I'm saying is because the project is only designed for a 20-year event, What FEMA cares about typically is the 100-year event, the base flood elevation. I believe those are the regulations in the code of in the CFR. So if you imagine there's a 20-year water surface elevation that we're containing within the levees and berms, but then the 100-year water surface is even above that, and it's over the berms because the water surface is higher. So in that case, it doesn't become channelized, and we're not raising the water surface. It just the whole area becomes a larger pond. So the floodplain will look like the FEMA regulatory floodplain, not what flooded in 2017. Does that answer your question?
Great, thank you. All right, this question is from Facebook, and it's Brian Gwynn. In the Reach 5, there is a population of homeless along the creek. There is a smoke of burning from all kinds of materials almost every night, or at least 2 nights a week. What can you do to deal with this problem for residents in the Golden Wheel Mobile Park?
So Jen could probably speak to this a little bit more, but I do know that Reach 5 has had some extensive issues with, we have not been able to complete the survey for that. So we are planning some creek cleanup in this area next week with the city of San Jose. And I'll let Jen add anything to that.
Yeah, there are a large number of encampments in that area. And actually, I want to address that the north side of the bank. So just north of the flea market, the city of San Jose is actually maintaining that area as a SOAR site. That's a site where they provide services and outreach to the encamped residents. So there won't be any removal of the encampments on that side, which is again the north side of the bank, just downstream of Berryessa. However, on the south side of the bank, we do have a few issues going on. There's some encampments that have come too close to the railroad tracks, and we're worried about the public safety issue when Granite Creek is offloading supplies. And then also all of the encampments that are in the area on the south bank, just downstream of Berryessa, we need to get our land surveyors in there to support the design of this capital project. So we will be partnering with the city of San Jose, and starting Monday of next week, we will be abating and cleaning that entire stretch of creek, again, from Berryessa Road to basically the end of the Granite Creek property. And so you'll notice that the area will be a bit cleaned up so we can get our surveyors in to complete their surveys there. That being said, after that, it is all private property there, and we really don't have the jurisdiction to continue with those efforts. We are operating under a right of entry that the capital project has obtained for us to do that work.
Great, thanks. So it looks like the individual that posed the question to Valley Water's hydrologist is indicating that it didn't answer the question, so we can bring Jack back into the meeting. The clarified question is, will the channelization cause the water in the creek to be higher than now, which could cause houses on the creek to flood that didn't in 2017?
No, I don't think that would be looked at as part of the analysis, and that would be inducing flooding. We typically do make sure that doesn't happen. So I'm trying to get at the original question to see if I can understand what they're concerned about. So if I understand correctly, they believe that if we channelize more of the water and not let it spill out, it's going to increase the water base flood elevation. But typically what happens, that's only when we do a 100-year flood control project, which is more typical, we will go through a full LOMAR process and get new base flood elevations and make sure everything's contained. But because this is a 20-year project, some of the standard things we do don't apply. So eventually, we do have to make sure it doesn't increase the 100 base flood elevation as well. But because we're designing for a 20-year, all that extra water will flood out anyway. So if we build our berm to only handle a 20-year flow, if a 100-year flow comes through, it's going to go over that berm, right? Because the water is even higher. So the level of protection is not the same as what FEMA is looking at per CFR.
Well, and I think what the person asking the question is looking to confirm is that we're not transferring risk to additional areas. And we're not. That is something that we look at with our modeling and confirm, make sure that the elements that we are proposing, even if they're not going to protect for the 100-year, but they're not transferring any risk to new areas that have not flooded previously.
And then we have another question, and it's related to the level of protection. Jeff Hare asks, so if climate change is a reality, which it is, why are you limiting all of these project proposals to protect only against the 20-year flood and not targeting the 100-year flood? And I think, Alec, you can answer this question.
So we still are continuing to look into the 100-year flood protection for this this area of Coyote Creek in coordinating with Army Corps, the U.S. Army Corps of Civil Engineers. Back in 2011, I believe, the estimate provided by the Corps to provide 100-year flood protection for this area ranged between $500 million and $1 billion. In comparison, the 20-year flood protection project has a estimated price tag of about $80 million. So we are still looking at the 100-year flood protection project, but in the interim, as directed by our board, we are proposing to design and construct in a timely manner to provide protection from the similarly sized storm event from February of 2017.
Great, thanks. So the next question comes from Irene, and it reads, part of the Water District's flood protection plan involves construction of a 4-foot berm around the western and northern boundaries of William Street Park. This will effectively block any ability of patrol cars to view the park. The district disavows any responsibility to maintain the park or repair the existing damage to the creek banks caused by the homeless encampments, because these are owned by the city of San Jose. Do I understand this correctly? What can we do to keep the creeks clean and stop the fires?
I'm going to take a stab at this. I may have Jen Codian step in and clarify some minor items. So regarding the 4-foot berm, that 4-foot berm, as mentioned, it's also in the FAQ, specifically number 16. The security was a concern for us that we took into account during the planning phase, specifically when we were looking at this berm along William Street Park. It was specifically designed to allow SJPD patrol vehicles to be able to see over and into the park to assess any security risks. So security, we have considered security, and we still continue to consider security during the design phase of these elements. Now, regarding the disavowing of the responsibility, currently that is City of San Jose property. We do not have rights to maintain or touch that property. When our project is constructed, we will be entering into an agreement with the City of San Jose to work collaboratively to maintain our flood protection elements. And with that, I'd like to give it over to Jen in case she would like to add a couple other items.
Yeah, Irene, I just want to say that, when we operate with the City of San Jose to do encampment cleanups, we do operate on that property because it is owned by them. And so again, I know we've had emails back and forth with each other. If the City of San Jose prioritizes that reach of creek to do encampment cleanups, Valley Water would absolutely partner with them. It's not property that we own or even have easement on. So we would need to be operating under the agreement. So if you're concerned with the area, again, contact the city and let them know that the neighborhood would like to see them prioritize that reach of creek, and Valley Water is happy to assist with the encampment cleanup.
Great, thank you. So
I want to just
Go
chime
ahead.
in with one
Sure.
additional thing. So one other element is that we can design the berm so that it can become a ramp for patrolling. We can incorporate other design elements into it in addition to the aesthetics to help provide some additional security. This is something that we will be looking into and coordinating with stakeholders as the design progresses.
Oh, thanks for that clarification. Great point. I want to ask the Valley Water team if we have any other meeting participants that have raised hands. It's about 7:37. I'd like just to pause and provide participants the opportunity to pose additional questions if they have them. I thought though, I'd like to just review a couple of the questions that are included in the frequently asked questions for this project. And Julianne will probably be the one that will speak to these. And the first one is, what type of easements will you need for Nagley Park residents? And how does this typically influence the property values of property within an easement?
So the easement will vary depending on the specific property and what flood prevention measures are located on or adjacent to the property. We actually have, with that, Jackie, able to chime in on that?
Yeah, and before we bring in our real estate staff, Jackie, we would like to also mention that any easements that we would need for either construction on a temporary basis or more permanent just for access to be able to inspect and maintain, any of those easements will be compensated to the appropriate property owner at the fair market value. And with that, I'd just like to turn it over to Jackie Carrasco from our real estate staff to add any additional specific information.
Thank you, Alec. As you mentioned, that we will be having a fair market value by a certified appraiser. So Valley Water will obtain a certified appraiser and have a fair market value evaluation done. And then the owners will be compensated for the easements and any impacts on their remaining property. So the long-term benefit to the property and owners is realized in the flood protection provided by the project.
Great, thanks. It looks like we do have a question in the Q&A portal from MK Musson. Is there a cross section of William Street Park? It sounds as if the park could essentially become a big hole so that it could potentially contain floodwater.
Yeah, allow me to share my screen. Here is a cross section. Let me go one slide back, or two slides back, I should say. We have William Street Park on the left and Selma Olinder on the right. This cross section is on the William Street Park side. We would have that vegetated berm that we've been discussing along the west side, along with a flood wall towards the southern tip. And then on the right side, which is Selma Olinder Park that we see over here, it would be protected by the passive barrier running along the street here.
Great, thank you. Another one of the questions that Valley Water has included in its FAQ is the question, acquiring or raising the 10 or so individual properties along Coyote Creek is a costly and invasive mitigation project for a very infrequent flooding event. Most, if not all, of the properties have been through several flooding events to date and have been restored to full functionality at a small fraction of the cost of buying or elevating, raising them. Why is there no option for Valley Water to provide much lower cost funding for relatively rare property repairs?
Oh, you want me to go? Okay, there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the risk of flooding is always going to be there, especially with a 20-year return period, which is pretty frequent compared to a 100-year storm event. So there's also extensive amount of damages that were repaired after these flood events, specifically after the 2017 flood event. So it is quite an expensive endeavor to not potentially raise or acquire them as a flood protection solution. Julianne, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation today, with climate change, some of these events are going to becoming more and more frequently. And so any money that we would spend on, if you take the same amount of money that we would have spent on elevating a property and put it into a fund to cost repairs, it's going to disappear quickly. Whereas if we elevate the property to the 20-year and we are pursuing, we have the possibility of pursuing some grants and looking into the possibility of raising those properties to the 100-year, then while it's a more upfront cost, over the long term, it is actually going to be a more efficient use of the funding.
Great, thank you. So Tom Yeager asks, Julianne mentioned options for design of the berm at the William Street Park. Can you provide more detail on what those design options are? The current proposal will change the character of the park significantly and would like to make, they would like to make sure it's functional, make sure it's functional, it's functionally, but also aesthetically pleasing and doesn't create other issues such as safety concerns. But it sounds like, Jill, you responded to that question earlier, and that's going to be a core component of the public engagement in the fall and the winter as it relates to, the purpose of these acquisitions and elevations is to provide room for the water to move. But you talked about different aesthetics and amenities that can be incorporated. Is that right?
Right. And so because we're still in the data gathering phase, we don't have any specific details that we can provide at this point. Once we complete the 30% design and have that meeting, we will have some more options to present to you at that time. And we will definitely take input in both in terms of aesthetics and making sure it's functional. I will also say that we have been coordinating with the Parks Advocates Group, and they were the one that actually, I believe, suggested the vegetated berm, and that was their preference of the solutions for this area. And we will also be working with San Jose Parks and Rec Department closely on this item.
But the bottom line is these, the answer to his question or the options or alternatives will be part of those community meetings. And
correct.
Yeah, they want to present at 30%.
In the fall and
we just don't have
potentially
those
this winter.
details.
But you're on the way. It's you're making
we're getting
progress,
there.
which is great. Super. All right. Well, we are at 7:44. Oh, and Tom says thank you. Thank you, Tom, for saying thank you. Are there any other, we'll give folks another, 5-10 minutes if someone's imagination is stirred or another question comes to their mind. Are there any, Alec, you think key messages or items you want to forecast to the folks that have been so engaged in these meetings and so impacted by the 2017 flood as either as it relates to the work that's happening now by Valley Water or as Valley Water prepares for the meetings this fall and winter?
Yeah. First, I'd like to say thank you to all that joined and asked us questions. We really do appreciate. We take those into account and we incorporate those into our design phase. Secondly, what we can look forward to in the next couple months, Julianne did touch on it, but I'll just give a real brief high-level summary of it. We're going to be data gathering. We need to know what's out there. We need to know what the surface of the ground looks like. We need to provide this information to their design consultants so they can do a thorough analysis of the potential proposed features so they can design and put those down on their plans so that we can present to you at the 30% phase. So look forward to several Valley Water staff, our consultant staff being out in the field in the coming months with high visibility jackets, pens and clipboards, getting data. And as always, feel free to reach out to Jose or Julianne with any questions or concerns that you may have at any point. With that, I'll just give it back to you, Christine.
Okay, great. And we have one more question, and it's a great question. It's from Michael. When will we know if our houses can be raised to the 100-year protection level?
So Michael, if you want to shoot me an email so I can know exactly which address and property you're referencing, it's going to be an ongoing conversation. As one, we need to gather the data first and determine if the house is even eligible for elevation. And then as part of that ongoing conversation with us and you, we will work towards that. But we anticipate having a little bit more clarity on this issue probably by the fall, again, after the 30% design is completed.
And to clarify, Michael, the current proposal for the Coyote Creek project is to elevate these properties, potentially one of them obviously being elevation, would be to elevate to the 20-year water surface elevation.
And then I see, was that our Facebook question, or do we have another Facebook question that we're waiting to be submitted into the Q&A portal, or?
I'll ask it verbally. Just so
Okay,
it's simpler.
wonderful. Thank you, Albert.
This is Valley Water staff. We do have a Facebook question from Brian Nguyen again. About more than 5 years ago, there was a presentation from San Jose official about the jogging trail and public parks along the creek. Is that project within the project as well? If so, when can it be done?
So that is definitely a San Jose question. I know they're working on the Coyote Creek Trail, and it has different segments. I believe the next segment that is going to be going to construction in 2022 is going to be the Maybury to Empire stretch. They are also currently working on the design phase of the other trail reaches. I would suggest to reach out to the appropriate San Jose staff to get more information on their trail project. But to summarize, we're also still in coordination with them for any conflicts potentially with our flood protection elements.
Great. Do we have any other raised hands or Facebook questions? Okay, it's 7:48. We did receive Michael's address, and it's in the chat, and you have that, Juliana. Thank you, Michael, as well as the email address that was submitted. So Valley Water staff has that information. I just also want to acknowledge that Gloria Ciara offered thanks to all the staff for the presentation and addressing questions. So I just want to acknowledge the civility of the meeting, and it's great to have staff here, but also members of the public participate so productively and offer their appreciation. Again, the information from tonight's meeting will be available at the Valley Water Project page. And we encourage you to go back and review the recorded information if you have questions, and certainly submit your questions to the project team, Julianne, the representative Stephen from AECom, and then Jose Villarreal. We have one more question here. Let me review it. And it's directed to Julianne. It's from Anyana. Julianne, for Reach 7, your answers have been coherent and informative. Here's another question. In extensive, and I can provide data research, anything can be elevated. You talk about eligible for elevation. Are you questioning the science of elevation or the politics of elevation?
It's a little more complicated than that. It's more just making sure that the different, the reports and any mitigation that would be required from the elevation will be feasible for the project. And we'll be working with each homeowner individually.
And to chime in to Ananya and to Ron Atkins, there actually are limitations to it. Specifically, for example, a city ordinance. You can't build the Empire State Building, for example, on your property. So there are limitations to what you can do. That being one specific example. So we do have to consider all of the restrictions in the feasibility analysis of elevation for each property.
Great, thank you. All right, we're at 7:51. I just want to see if there's any additional questions. More thank yous that folks have been providing. So I know Valley Water really appreciates the really quality, engaged participation. And again, I just want to acknowledge it. Valley Water staff, are there questions that you have? that I don't have in my portal? All right. Well, on behalf of Valley Water, I want to thank the initially 72 participants. We're down to 47 community members from joining the meeting tonight and remaining so engaged over the last several years. And again, thank Valley Water staff for their clear and concise responses. And we appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting this fall or winter. So thank you very much.